Welcome back to Tipton Bros. Today, we'll be discussing the Martin P6M SeaMaster Flying Boat Strategic Bomber. Design, development, service history, and specifications will be provided. Before we begin, I must disclose that I am no expert and never claimed to be. Now, let's get into it. In the infancy of the Cold War, aeronautic innovation within the US exploded, fueled by competition against a rising threat in the East, the Soviet Union. Air power had become the #1 priority for the United States military, a frantic struggle to possess the sky and consequently invaluable nuclear leverage, which, if mishandled, could spell catastrophe. For this very reason, the US Air Force surpassed all other branches in terms of tactical value. Now dwarfed in the shadow of their counterpart, the Navy knew it must act swiftly to preserve both government funding and reputation. The idea of a seaplane striking force materialized and quickly gained traction, revolving around water-based strategic bombers which could conduct mine-laying, reconnaissance, and most importantly, deliver nuclear weapons at a moment's notice around the globe. Supported by a slew of seaplane tenders and submarines, this mobile concept was certainly enticing and convinced US Navy officials to pull the trigger. The formal requirement was issued in April of 1951, demanding an operational range of 1,500 miles, or 1,300 nautical miles, a hulking carrying capacity of roughly 30,000 pounds, and the capability to maintain Mach 0.9, or 691 miles per hour, in short intervals. Obviously, this behemoth would be jet-powered, and a complicated undertaking for even the most qualified manufacturer. Convair and Martin submitted proposals to the USN, with the latter being selected. A contract was subsequently dealt to Martin for an immediate 2 prototypes, with 4 more pre-production examples to follow. The end goal was an anticipated 24 production aircraft that would never arrive, an imposing fleet of jet-powered flying boats to park on Stalin's doorstep. Design features included a deep fuselage which tapered off towards the tail, acting as both a hull and storage for an immense internal bomb load. Initially dubbed the XP6M, the aircraft borrowed heavily from a previously failed Martin project, the XB-51, making use of a T-style tail unit and a pneumatically sealed, rotating bomb bay. The main planes were shoulder-mounted, swept at a 40-degree angle, and possessed a noticeable droop, or downward slant known as an anhedral. This configuration equalized roll stability. Other notable characteristics involved a high-position flight deck and a retractable wheeled undercarriage, allowing the flying boat to land on prepared runways if necessary, adding to its versatility. Concerning the power plants, Martin engineers first elected to use 2 Curtiss-Wright ramjets, but their complexity proved troublesome. So, the job was deferred to the time-tested Allison J71 turbojet, specifically of the A4 variety. Each wing root was fitted with a pair of engine nacelles, which rested atop the main planes, for a total of 4 Allison J71 turbojets. The platform of the SeaMaster had largely been fleshed out. All that remained was testing, which commenced on July 14, 1955, when prototype XP6M1 took flight. Trials revealed that the engines were angled too far inward, scorching the fuselage once the afterburners were engaged. Beyond this, the aircraft appeared to be moving in the right direction, and US Navy officials seemed optimistic. The nacelle placement was tweaked, and a positive outlook persisted until tragedy struck the project roughly 6 months later. On December 7, 1955, Prototype 1 would suffer a catastrophic control system malfunction, as the elevator became stuck in the full-up position. This sent the XP6M1 into an instantaneous steep climb and a reactionary sharp bank left, subjecting the airframe to excess stress, leading to structural failure. The SeaMaster would disintegrate at roughly 5,000 feet altitude and plummet into the Potomac River below, killing all 4 crew members aboard. An unfortunate accident which would foreshadow the bomber's short-lived service life. Prototype XP2 would experience similar ailments regarding control surfaces in the tail unit, Despite corrective efforts, the aircraft would be lost in a crash only 11 months after the original disaster on November 9, 1956. Again, the culprit was an unresponsive elevator, locked in the upright position. Bearing an uncanny resemblance to the first crash, the flying boat pitched up, stalled, and disintegrated at 6,000 feet over northern Delaware. The one saving grace about prototype XP2 is that the crew were able to safely bail before impact. A rocky start for the SeaMaster to say the least. Officially designated the YP6M1, Martin soldiered forward, cranking out 6 complete samples in 1958 alone. The United States Navy even offered the Harvey Point Defense Testing Activity Facility as grounds to hopefully accelerate development of the Martin P6M SeaMaster. Trials continued in the coastal waters off North Carolina, but the lumbering bomber once more fell on its own sword. The J-71 turbojets were unreliable. Control surface issues lingered, and the aircraft had a propensity to ingest water when loaded to a higher gross weight. Patience was paper thin for Martin, and the entire program hung from a single thread. Engineers scrambled to address the extensive list of shortcomings, starting with the power plant. The Allison engines were abandoned in favor of 4 Pratt & Whitney J75 axial flow turbojets, a more robust and powerful system. The avionics were overhauled, and an in-flight refueling probe was attached, boosting the operational range of the SeaMaster. With a myriad of updates, this new variant became the P6M2. 3 examples have been completed by 1959, with 8 airframes in construction. While the revised aircraft faced its own obstacles, the Navy was eager for the giant to prosper. Regrettably, in the summer of '59, defense budget cuts presented the Navy with a choice: to keep the faltering SeaMaster afloat, or fund its ballistic missile submarine program. The USN would side with the latter, condemning the flying boat to a premature end. Martin attempted to resurrect the platform on the civilian market under the moniker of Sea Mistress, but this too fell flat. In total, 12 P6M SeaMaster strategic bombers were ever assembled. This encompasses all patterns. Before we wrap up, let's cover specifications for the P6M2. The final iteration employed 4 Pratt & Whitney J75 turbojet engines, which produced 17,500 pounds of thrust each, for a cumulative output of 70,000 pounds. Maximum speed topped out at 686 miles per hour at an optimum altitude of 20,000 feet, and cruise speed sat at 535 miles per hour. The P6M2 had a range of 2,083 miles, or 1,810 nautical miles. Effective combat range shrinks to a third at only 750 miles when loaded with ordnance. Service ceiling peaked at an impressive 50,000 feet, with a rate of climb pushing 7,400 feet per minute. The SeaMaster had a length of 134 feet 4 inches, a height of 33 feet 10 inches, and an overall wingspan of 102 feet 7 inches. With such size came an equivalent gross weight of 184,280 pounds and an empty weight of 97,440 pounds. Despite a monstrous stature, the aircraft only housed 4 crew members, 2 being pilots. Lastly, armament. 2 20mm autocannons of an unspecified make were mounted in the tail and controlled remotely from the flight deck. Mines and aerial reconnaissance cameras were common, but the SeaMaster could also deliver 2 Mark 91 30-kiloton yield nuclear bombs, or 1 Mark 28 1.1 megaton yield hydrogen bomb. In the end, the SeaMaster arrived at precisely the wrong time. A few years earlier, and the P6M2 may have been the face of U.S. air power, and served for decades to come. I hope you've enjoyed today's brief overview of the Martin P6M SeaMaster Flying Boat Strategic Bomber. We are a small channel, so a like is greatly appreciated, and recommendations are always welcome. Again, I am no expert, and never claim to be. Until next time, on Tipton Bros.